Again, Maria, I want to thank you for your vision for the book, this symposium. Anything that takes research and theory and ties it to practice is a good thing, and so I'm all up for that, so thank you very much. This project also gave me the opportunity to work with some wonderful science teachers, Katie Willet and Caroline Gergel, who are not here, but I learned quite a deal from them. So that they were thanking me profusely for working with them, helping them understand how to infuse SRL in their classrooms. But I had to genuinely thank them for really opening my eyes to how regulation could fit in their world. So it was a very exciting project. So my job today is to provide an overview of two lessons on life sciences: natural selection and photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, these lessons were quite different. But there were areas of overlap where it counted in terms of regulation. So my goal, most of what I'm going to be focusing on, is how these two lessons really converge to talk about the role of motivation beliefs and how that impacts engagement, talk about the use of self-evaluative standards, and how they got students to think cyclically during lessons repeatedly, which is important. And then, time permitting, I'll get to the standards and the college readiness, some principles. So, natural selection. This was a 2-day lesson. The goal was to help students understand how natural selection results in gene pool change over time. All right, so across 2 days, there was a lot of activities that students were asked to do. Day one was really about this red and white bean allele activity, pertaining to a bunny population with fur and no fur traits that were desirable or not. Students were asked to randomly select these beans, and they record the data, they would compute the data, they would make predictions about what they thought would happen, they'd graph the results, they'd write up the results. That was day one. Day two, they came back, they reviewed what just happened, they took a short quiz, but then the teacher engaged them in a series of additional activities to again come back to this premise of how natural selection works. And it's really this emphasis on multiple activities that really are addressed in both lessons that are important. So whether it was watching video images of the Galapagos species and how that intersected with environmental conditions, or talking about Darwin travels, or another allele activity, students were exposed to multiple opportunities to learn a similar principle, which is important. Now in terms of okay, something happened there. But in terms of photosynthesis and respiration, this lesson was about helping students understand the distinctions as well as the areas of overlap between these two principles. And so what would happen here is that, well, this was similar to the other lesson in that it was 2 days. It focused on a lot of activities, a lot of different activities, but it was structured differently. This one was about stations that students could progress through during the 2 days. So as one group was in station 1 with the teacher, other groups were circulating around to the other stations. And so the moral of the story is, after the 2 days, or towards the end, all the groups would have gotten through all the stations, and culminating in station 6, which was a virtual game activity where they would bring together a lot of the principles that they learned. So stations 2 to 5, we really want to emphasize that they were all getting at similar points, but students were asked to do different things. So whether it was a card sort where they were assembling chemical questions, or putting 3D foldable models together, or using readings and then creating a story or a comic strip, students were asked to engage in different activities to learn this basic principle. Okay, so again, these lessons were very different, but what I want to emphasize is how they converged across these 3 broad principles of regulation. And I'm going to first start with cycles of regulatory thinking. Now, I think both of them did this, but I'm going to emphasize the photosynthesis respiration lesson because they did it so explicitly and specifically, which was tremendous. So there were several stations, like I just indicated, and although there were different activities at each station, right, which is good, the regulatory structure was the same at each station. What I mean by that is that each station, students set an outcome and a process goal. They were given prompts to monitor, even though they could have, and I argue in the chapter, some that could have been beefed up a little bit, but they had elements of that. And they also got students to engage in structured reflection, right? And why I'm going to emphasize structured reflection is because from my experience, students often they do not get a sufficient and structured opportunity to engage in high quality and adaptive reflection. And they need practice in doing that. And so what they did at each station, students had to answer a series of questions. If they reached their learning goal, were they encountering challenges? Were they still confused about something? What's the main thing they learned? And so what was exciting about this lesson to me was the fact that students were getting repetitive practice in reflecting in the same way across different activities, addressing the same principle, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, in terms of the second SRL point is self-evaluative standards. As we know, simply the benchmarks, the criteria we use to make judgments of performance. So in the photosynthesis respiration lesson, they did this because the students set goals at each station. The goals became the benchmarks against which they judged their success. They also had a self-assessment activity which allowed them to do the same thing. But what I really liked was the natural selection lesson where they used predictions repeatedly over the 2 days. Students made many predictions. And what that did is the predictions became those natural standards that students were using to evaluate themselves all the time. So it got them cognitively engaged in the lesson, which is incredible. So I think what was really important here was that both of these lessons teachers were intentionally doing things to help students use specific standards that got them to evaluate the things that they wanted them to evaluate. And that was a very intentional approach on their part, and it was to answer the question, how well am I performing? How well am I learning, right? That's the key. Now something that I think often gets de-emphasized when I speak to teachers is how they help to engage and motivate students. And motivation is what? We initiate and we sustain goal-directed behavior, right? And we know a lot of things influence motivation. And when it comes to motivation beliefs, we have efficacy and perceptions of autonomy and value, etc. So what was really exciting about this lesson was that, and the teachers weren't labeling this as this is what they were intentionally doing, but you could see it in the lesson that this is what they were doing. They were targeting interest, autonomy perceptions, and self-efficacy. And so let me just illustrate the natural selection and interest. They really hooked the students and then sustained that interest. So they showed them a video clip of the Galapagos species, and what she did is she embedded a familiar or a popular theme song from a video game as part of this video, and the students enjoyed it. They had fun, they got excited. That's the hook. But then they tried to sustain interest by relating the content to a variety of real-life situations. So this was a really real thing, and that really engaged the students. In terms of autonomy, we see that in the photosynthesis and respiration lecture. The students were able to select their own pace and sequence of selecting stations. They set their own goals at each station. They decided. They were given choice within a very structured activity. But self-advocacy is the one I really want to emphasize, because what I loved about this lesson, students were given multiple opportunities to evaluate and learn across stations, across activities. And to really enhance efficacy, you need to give students multiple opportunities to demonstrate success. It can't just be based on one outcome or one instances to show what you can do. You need many attempts to do that. So it's really exciting for me to see that. I think I'm getting close to out of time, so I'm just going to get to a couple of points about college readiness. 2 points. One is, what I loved about these lessons, and I argue in my chapter, they could have done things better and take it to the next level, but was really about metacognition. They were getting students to think before and after about how they were approaching. So they were getting students to not only answer these questions, but to ask these questions themselves. What's my approach? What am I trying to accomplish? What's my goal here before they do anything? Or to predict. They were asked, how am I performing? Or what can I do to improve? What's the problem? And to begin to think in a very systematic way about that. Now, the respiration photosynthesis lesson really did this really well explicitly. But I think what both could have done better is helping students to monitor. As you go to college, you have to become really in tune to what you're not good at, what you are good at, what's being asked of you. And so increasing student awareness of what it is that they have to focus on is critical here, because that's the feedback that keeps that loop going. The next phrase I think is also critical, and we saw elements of this throughout all the lessons, is getting kids to think in the language of strategies. That is, in terms of process goals, in terms of monitoring their behaviors, monitoring their progress towards goals, or thinking about, is this strategy actually working? So getting students metacognitively engaged, asking themselves questions that are going to help them monitor, be aware, and to be mindful of the tactics and strategies that are necessary to function at a high level in a given content area. That is, I think, what these lessons were doing, and is really preparing students for college.
It's so hard to be last.